was probably in 6th or 7th grade. I thought I wanted to be a psychologist, which might tell you something about the nature of my family, but we're not going to get into that right now. And in fact, went off to college, majored in psychology, was the director of the crisis center there. While I was an undergrad, I fell in with this residential program for emotionally disturbed children and became a counselor there. And then, much according to my plan and my hopes, went from undergrad to a graduate program at the University of Maryland. Everything seemed to be going just as I had scripted, really. First couple of years of grad school were what grad school oftentimes is, a panic and stressful, but that was okay. And I made friends with professors. I landed a job in a community mental health center doing family therapy. Again, my plan seemed to be coming to fruition. Until God threw a little pebble at my window around the end of the second year of graduate school. It was a very sort of typical morning. I remember it still vividly. I got up, little sleep, had some sort of nasty breakfast, ran off for a 10 o'clock appointment with this professor who was supervising me in a psychological testing course. We were to go over the profile of tests that I had taken as part of the course to help us familiarize ourselves with the tests, right? So we get in there, get into his office. First we go over the MMPI. It's a personality inventory. If you've ever taken it, don't tell me what you got on it. I won't tell you what I got on it. But I was relieved to hear that it did not suggest that I was unfit for a graduate program in psychology. And then we went to discuss the Strong Campbell inventory. It's a career inventory that sort of measures the test taker's interest with the interest of people in a variety of professions who report themselves to be happy in those professions. Okay? So the test taker's interest with people in a variety of professions who are happy doing those jobs. So the supervisor was looking at my profile and he says, well, look at this, you're very similar to that of the therapist. And again, I was kind of relieved, okay, good, I'm not going to get kicked out of the program. And I thought that was kind of it for the discussion. And honestly, it really seemed like he was just about to put the profile down that he was looking at when he said, almost as an afterthought, well, what do you think of this? Actually, what you came out most similar to was that of a minister. Well, so let me tell you, that was my response too. So I laughed, because you see, and again, this is part of my story that some of you know, some of you don't. I had only been baptized since I was a senior in college. I had only been baptized. I've only been going to church for the last 3 years. At the time, I was going to the nearby Catholic church. The thought of being a minister was as far from my mind as possible. And yet, there it was. Throwing a pebble on a window. It would be still 2 more years, several more pebbles at my window, and one sort of big boulder on top of my head before I presented myself to my Episcopal priest and said, so I think God might be calling me to the priesthood. But it all started in that very sort of ordinary and unexpected moment. I'm reminded of that moment for me because we hear the story today of the call of Simon, whom we know better as Peter, his brother Andrew, and James and John. In classic Markan fashion, we don't get a lot of details. He doesn't give us a lot of words. Jesus' leaders just walking along by the Sea of Galilee, and he looks out and spots these fishermen, right? And we don't know what Jesus is doing. We don't know who's with him. We don't know what sort of drew his attention to Simon and Andrew. All we know is that he looks at them and says, hey, why don't you follow me? We don't know what Simon and Andrew say. In response, all we get is, they didn't. In fact, he apparently must have been persuasive because they just go right down in there. Same sort of sketchy details with James and with John, right? We hear a little bit more. They're in a boat with Zebedee, James's father, and there are other hired hands with them. And we know that there are many nets, but that's not exactly a sensational detail, right? And again, Jesus immediately spots them, asks them to follow him. They drop their nets and go. Which always makes me wonder, well, how does Zebedee feel about that one, you know? That is it. And I gotta tell you, I spent some time researching, trying to get a little bit of the backstory of these characters, and there's not a lot there. They were probably from the town known as Capernaum. It turns out that Simon, known as Peter, might have been married, which also begs the question, well, I wonder how she felt about that. They were people of reasonable social standing, of sort of ordinary education. They were common Jews at the time, and that is it. We don't know much about them. We don't know why Jesus called them. We don't know if they had any particular gifts. We don't know anything. Now, what we do know is what happens after he called them. What we do know is that they go on to spread the gospel and to invite people to follow them, to follow Jesus. And what we do know is that their lives were changed forever. And then they went on and changed the lives of others forever. But, let's be clear, we also know that they were hardly perfect and did much less than get it right all the time. I mean, Peter is just a hot mess, as people like to say. One moment, he gets it right, and he says, oh, I know who you are. You're the Messiah. The next moment, he's challenging Jesus' prediction of what's going to happen. Jesus calls him Satan. Ooh, he's the cornerstone of the church. One moment, Jesus invites him to get up and walk on the water, and he takes a few steps, and he's thinking, look at me, I can do this. The next moment, he is sinking like the stone that he is. And of course, we know about the whole messy passion story with Peter, right? I mean, he says, I will never deny you, Jesus. And then, of course, he does 3 times before the sun rises. And yet, he's the cornerstone of the church. So, here's the thing about these characters. Maybe we don't need to know much about who they are or what gifts they have. Maybe none of that matters. Maybe what we can learn from them, from their story, is about how God jumps into our stories and our lives and calls us, all of us. Now, I don't know if any of us are going to be another cornerstone to any church. And I certainly hope that you all don't experience the same ending that these 4 experienced. At least 3 or 4 of them were martyred. Doesn't sound like a great invitation to me. But what I do know is that God called all of us. And if the stories tell us anything, God comes to us not so often in burning bushes. That's a reference to Moses, by the way, if you're not familiar with the Hebrew Scriptures. Not in burning bushes, and here's the thing, God comes to us in ordinary moments. God comes to us when we're sort of engaged in our regularly scheduled program. And then God says, I got a different plan for you. Ordinary moments. But then, God invites us to try something different. And because I believe in truth in advertising, as it was for Peter and for Andrew and for James and John, that different plan probably involves living outside our comfort zone a fair bit. That different plan probably involves taking a risk or 2. The moment might start ordinary, but the plan might be different. Look, Peter had never walked on water, but he did. Peter had never even crossed the threshold of a Gentile home, but he did, time and time again, to tell them, this Jesus guy is someone you should pay attention to. outside his comfort zone. Ordinary moments where God gives us God's plan, tells us, let's try something different, invites us outside of our comfort zones to take a risk. But here's the thing, and here's the thing I believe with all my heart. God never calls any of us to do something that God doesn't believe we can do. Our callings, whatever they might be, whatever form they might take, are callings that God believes we can do. Sure, they might be scary, sure, they might be risky, but we can do them. Sometimes by the strength of our own gifts, all the time by the grace of God. But what God calls us to, we can do. 2 weeks ago when I preached, I talked about how ordination is not the big deal. Speaking of that, God's calling us right now. I don't know, but let me know what I'm supposed to do. Okay, so, for the record, we did not work that out in advance. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about baptism as really the heart and soul of the Christian condition. We talked about how ministry comes in all shapes and forms and sizes and roles and settings. I want to add to that today and tell you that the notion of being called isn't reserved only for the first apostles or even for the people wearing black shirts and plastic collars today. That each of us gets called to something. That God is tireless in throwing pebbles at our windows and saying, try this over here. God's constantly busting into our lives and saying, not your plan, but mine. If only